Okay, so we have 3 industry experts joining us on transportation. You can see the transportation from air to ground. There are differences between air and ground for sure. The requirements they sometimes could be quite dramatic. Before we go deeper into sustainable transportation, I would like each one of you maybe spend 2-3 minutes each only introducing what you do in your company related to sustainable transportation. Amanda, start from you.
Okay. Hey, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here. So I'm the head of research and technology for Airbus Americas, so basically coordinating all innovation, sustainability activities in the Western Hemisphere. And pretty much my team's focus is what's next, right? What's going to be the next generation of aircraft, helicopters, satellites, anything with regards to transportation in or beyond the atmosphere. And so sustainability is actually now become an absolute driving focus in our company. Matter of fact, our mission statement is we pioneer sustainable aerospace for a safe and united world. So it's part of our core business. And we'll get into it here in a little bit, but we have absolutely adopted an all of the above with regards to solutions to decarbonize and not just get to net zero, but actual zero emissions by 2050. So aviation is probably the longest development timeline. So we are working diligently now if we're going to reach those benchmarks.
Tom?
Great. Yi, thanks for inviting me here today. And Drew and Amanda, it's good to meet you both for the first time. And good morning, everyone else out here. I see a couple of familiar faces. So since today's panel is focused on sustainable transportation, obviously Toyota's doing a lot of sustainability activities across our entire enterprise, but let me just focus my opening remarks on the vehicle side of the business, because really that's where the rubber hits the road, literally and figuratively as well in this discussion. So, our goal when it comes to sustainability is to reduce carbon. Our goal is not to put a certain number of a certain type of technologies out on the road. We sell 10 million vehicles a year in 170 countries, and that is a lot of diversity. We have a very diverse world in terms of economics, affordability, infrastructure, energy supply. There's 1 billion people that don't have access to electricity. Even within the United States and here in North America, there's a great diversity across those different spectrums of issues. So our philosophy really is to provide as many tools as we can to help all consumers at all price points who need all types of different vehicles reduce their carbon footprint as quickly as possible. We don't see a binary choice. So we are pursuing a portfolio approach of technologies, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, battery electric vehicles, and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And we will continue to pursue this into the future. And to date, we've sold over 20 million electrified vehicles globally, 5.5 million here in North America. We've got 21 models that we offer for sale here in the States in terms of electrified vehicles. And so we will continue down this path. Clearly, battery electric vehicles are here. They're an important market, and it's going to continue to be a growing and important market. We're investing $70 billion as a company globally between now and 2030 to promote electrified vehicles. Over half of that will be solely dedicated to battery electric vehicles, and we expect to have 30 models in the market by 2030 and 15 by mid-decade in 2025. So that's just a snapshot of kind of our approach and our philosophy and where we are today.
Drew?
Thanks, Yi, and nice to meet you both. Good morning, everyone. I'm Drew Baglino, and I've been at Tesla since 2006, so I've sort of witnessed the acceleration of sustainable energy mission of Tesla sort of unfold both within the company and without, as lithium-ion batteries have kind of become a a reality for many applications, which is certainly exciting to see happen in my career, and I'm sure others in the audience are excited by that. My responsibilities at Tesla are around everything energy storage and conversion. Products like Megapack, Powerwall, but also the power electronics in the car, the supercharging system and network, the drive units that make the car go, the battery packs in the car, and the cell supply chain. Not the cell supply chain, but the cell manufacturing process that we're trying to develop to reduce the cost and improve the scalability of lithium-ion batteries. So, excited to be here today to talk about this very important topic.
Yeah, thank you for the quick introduction. So for sustainable transportation, of course, the most important question is, what are the powers? What type of powers we should use? Maybe the first question is more for Drew and Tom first, but Amanda, feel free to chime in. For the ground transportation, is that a done deal? That's lithium-ion batteries? Is that a done deal, right? So there's small passenger cars, there's bus, there's trucks. And what's your view right there?
I think if you just look at the trends, we've got some countries in Europe where nearly all vehicles sold, if not all vehicles sold, are electric. Even in California, where we're, I think, over 10% vehicles sold were electric. It's certainly going that way, as faster than, to be honest, many people have predicted, which is great. And the same is true if you, for example, look at China and the buses in China, overwhelmingly electric. I don't see an obvious barrier for at least wheeled road transport. Trains, maybe a little bit more infrastructure to go into making them 100% electric, but certainly they can be. It seems like it's a done deal to me, I guess.
Tom, good to see your view as well.
There's not, honestly, there's not too much to disagree with there, right? I mean, as far as vehicles that use batteries, lithium batteries look like they're the way to go. We've got a lot of work to do to find all that lithium and cobalt, magnesium, and the other minerals that are going to be required to produce all of these batteries. And whether it's a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, or battery electric, and even a fuel cell vehicle, which is a hybrid vehicle and has a battery, these types of batteries are clearly here to stay. Maybe we'll save it for another question. There's a lot of work to be done on the supply chain side in order to get us there. But I would also say let's not forget for light duty and particularly for heavy duty transportation as well. There are other options that aren't so-called battery driven vehicles, and I'm referring to, of course, hydrogen fuel cells. And so we can have a discussion around that too, maybe if you want. But there's a lot of advantages. For the large trucks in particular for hydrogen, and so consistent with our portfolio approach, we're getting into that business as well. We've built a assembly line at our Georgetown, Kentucky facility to produce hydrogen fuel cell stacks, and we're looking at that as a new frontier, if you will, for hydrogen.
Yeah. Well, speaking of this fuel cells of choice, this could be also others. Amanda, so for aviation, your energy density requirement is so much more than ground transportation. Yeah. So what's your thought? What's the choices of the
I think power? Metal ion batteries are going to have a very limited impact in aviation. They've got a couple of big strikes against them. One, they're not very density intensive. They're heavy. They take a long time to recharge. And then in aviation, a non-negotiable is safety. And what we've seen in some of the past experiences, they have a tendency, if one cell overheats, we've had some fires on board aircraft, and that's not something that we're willing to accept. So on some of the smaller vehicles where range, payload, recharge times are not as critical, you might see some battery vehicles. We're talking advanced air mobility. But beyond that, it's going to have a very, very limited impact. And so we're looking at Certainly sustainable aviation fuels, biofuels, for the 40,000 plus airliners that are in the fleet today, the 1,000 or more that are being added every year. We want to have a drop in fuel. But even biofuels have limited applications. You're dealing with feedstocks, but then also you're still emitting carbon at 40,000 feet. So how do you start getting away from that? The next on the list is going to be the synthetic fuels, and I think we saw some ideas, right? Hydrogen and carbon, hydrocarbons. Boom! It seems so easy, right? But a lot of work going on there. But we believe the end game is to go for zero emission aircraft, at least zero carbon aircraft, and to do that, it's hydrogen. And so we're investing billions in researching what it's going to take to bring hydrogen into the aviation market, either through fuel cells driving electric motors or direct hydrogen combustion. But the issue there is, while hydrogen is very energy dense by weight, which is really great when you're trying to lift it up to 40,000 feet, it's very, it's just the opposite on volume. Mm-hmm. So you end up with larger tanks and potentially heavier tanks. So we've made a commitment to have a zero carbon aircraft in operation by an airline by the mid-30s. And so we're working on that right now. We expect to launch that within the next 2 to 3 years, which is an incredibly fast timeline to actually have something prototypes and certified and in use by 2035. And but then it's still going to take decades to get that to become a predominant fuel source and utilization in the industry, right? Unlike a car, our aircraft are 30 to 40 years old and still out there flying.
It's impressive how long they can stay in service, to be honest.
Yeah. And we talked about the not only recyclability but the reusability, and that's why aircraft are maintained to such high standards for safety, maintainability, and that's why they get the tender loving care that they need to make sure that their cargo, whether it's packages or people, is going to be treated safely and securely.
Yeah. So I want you to imagine, I know aviation, you need such high energy density. That's why renewable fuel, the fuel is probably the solution. But let me take a step back a little bit, asking you a question. Well, you in Tesla's car, I've been driving Tesla, by the way, 6 years now. I'm a strong supporter of Tesla. So I even have a console early. All my charging is still free, electricity and a supercharge. I like it.
Lucky you.
Yeah. So I asked this question. I said, typically you get 250, 260 watt per kilo, maybe a little bit more right now, right? And Battery 500 Consortium and Department of Energy try to get to 500 watt per kilo. Yeah. Imagine if you have 500 watt per kilo for ground transportation. Tom, tell me what possibility that can enable. Among that, can that enable some aviation already if it's 500? What about we get to 1,000 watt per kilo? What would happen for the batteries? Just imagine that a little bit. I don't know who wants to take this question first.
That would be great.
Yeah. Just imagine. Yeah. We have a lot of young folks right here working on batteries, trying to innovate to get there.
I mean, I can be the Debbie Downer, but even with those type of projected energy densities, the amount of energy required to transport 200 or 300 people a couple thousand miles, the weight would be still 4 to 5 times the weight of today's aircraft. So in just batteries.
Yeah.
So we don't see that as a feasible role for long term.
I think that with Tesla's starting to deliver semi trucks this winter to our first customer and using them internally, and we've been able to do that with today's 250, 260 watt hour per kilogram, like you said, technology without sacrificing on cargo capacity. Really, the benefit if possible, of a higher energy per mass battery is that generally mass is cost. So if that is true, that the 500 watt hour per kilogram or 1,000 watt hour per kilogram battery is actually lower cost per kilowatt hour, that's great, because it makes all the applications more affordable, or you could increase the sort of utility of a vehicle at the same cost, right? Like more range per vehicle at the low end of the market. I'm not so certain that the higher energy density will come with lower cost, because historically that hasn't really happened with most of the new energy technologies. There's actually like an interesting curve if you kind of look at like lithium to sodium or the different cathodes, sort of energy density versus cost. There is an interesting relationship there, and there's maybe some physics reasons that I can't speak to why that is, but if there's a way to break through that trade space of energy density and cost to actually win on both, then I think it benefits everybody in the sustainability transportation space, because there's just less investment in material to deliver the same outcome. And then when you're thinking about the circular economy, the benefit of electrification with lithium-ion batteries, or really any batteries, is that you only have to like get the materials assembled and sort of like refined out of the ground once, and then they stay in the economy compared to like the fossil fueled economy. Again, if we can get to 500 watt hour per kilogram or 1,000 watt hour per kilogram, then it's half as many materials in that circular economy, or a quarter of as many materials in the circular economy. And it's not like the circular economy is free. Like, there's definitely processing cost to get back to
I really like the idea of a selling point about high energy density, also saving the amount of materials as well for the same amount of battery pack, like kilowatt hour you want.
Yeah, it's all the same problem, right? Like if you're talking about 300 terawatt hours and you got to get to 300 terawatt hours, and you're talking about 250 watt hour per kilogram, like the math is straightforward for how many tons of batteries that you need to produce. So if you can make that a quarter as many tons, that's fantastic for that problem statement.
So you only had one sort of related but kind of tangential point. By the way, I think the fossil fuels are circular. They just take like 1 billion years or something for it to happen.
Fair. Yeah.
Something like that.
Maybe more than 1 billion. I don't know.
It will be on our lifetime.
We don't have to worry about it. But so where was I going to go now? So in terms of this massive amount of minerals that we're going to need to electrify the fleet, over the next, pick your time frame. Certainly between now and 2030, maybe 2035, we have a real pinch point, right, in the supply chain. We need mines, we need processing, we need them in places that are reliable, that where the minerals are processed in an environmentally friendly way and a socially responsible way in terms of the labor and other things that are used to extract and process the minerals. And it's a massive amount, and these mines, I was fortunate, maybe lucky. About 6 years ago, I hired a guy into my group who was the environmental guy for one of the largest mining companies in the world, and it was kind of stumbled into that one, I guess, at the time. And it's $1 billion or more to bring one of these mines into production, and it can take 10 years. And so we've got a real pinch point, I think, when you look at what the expectations and frankly the hopes are in terms of electrifying the fleet versus what we can do with the supply chain. So the circular economy part is really important. But the other point I wanted to bring up is, for us, and I mentioned the portfolio approach, particularly in that time frame, if you have and by the way, please don't misunderstand the statement. We are producing battery electric vehicles now, and we will be producing a lot more, as I said, across the board. So the point, though, is for a 300-mile battery, it has a 100% utilization factor. It always operates on electricity. Now, the driver may have a second car, and there may be X% of the driver's miles that aren't electric. But the battery electric vehicle has a 100% utility factor. A plug-in hybrid, they've been criticized for having low utility factors. People don't plug them in, this, that, and the other. Some of that based on studies from Europe where people get company cars and free fuel, so there's not a real incentive to plug them in. But if you have a 300-mile battery, and you use it, and again, it's not an either or, but just to illustrate the point, and you use it to make 6 50-mile plug-in hybrids. And let's say those 50-mile plug-in hybrids have a 50% utilization rate on electricity. That's 6 times 0.5. That's 3 times the amount of electric miles from that same amount of mineral and that same battery capacity than selling one battery electric vehicle. Again, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be selling the battery electric vehicles. Tesla's selling a ton of them, and people want them. But as we think about the full system approach to reducing carbon, I think that's where we need to really not close our eyes to what some of these other options are that can really help address some of the real-world challenges that we're going to face while still reducing carbon and doing it in vehicles that people can afford.
Yeah, there's definitely a focus on, or there should be a focus, let's say, on carbon offset per kilowatt hour of battery produced. And not every application is the same. I think the rideshare application is a really good example of the utilization ratio between like a rideshare vehicle and a personal vehicle is almost like 6 to 1 in terms of miles per month or miles per year, and in the end, that's utilization of the battery, and I think same is sort of true of semi trucks as an example, like just in terms of the sheer usage profile of a million miles on a semi truck is pretty normal over the various users of the truck before it's decommissioned. So absolutely, like putting the energy where it is enabling sustainability the most is a good philosophy, and to the degree that like policy incentivizes that and the market rewards that, I think people will do it. Certainly something that we discuss at Tesla.
Yeah, so that's good. Hey, for the audience, you can use your mobile app to type in the questions. So it will come to me, I can see on the screen. Yeah, feel free to do so. I do want to touch upon a few other questions. Whether it's renewable fuels or it's the battery's power. So the scale I present to you, I measure in kilowatt hour or terawatt hour. That's the unit to use for aviation. You probably use different units if you don't use batteries. So how do we get to that scale? In my slide, I show if it's 300 terawatt hour, it actually will take 300 years to produce. And in order to shorten that time to 20 years or 30 years, we need to increase the production. 10x, 20x, maybe 30x. If it's renewable fuel, we are facing similar issue. I haven't analyzed the fuel yet. Yeah, no, so Amanda, come back to you. Yeah, how do we do the scale?
I mean, whatever the basis of the fuel is, whether it's electricity or these renewable or synthetic fuels, they all come down to needing green energy to produce them. And so the amount of green energy just has to, not just go 10x, but 10x times 10x times 10x, 1,000 times more. If you took the amount of energy required to produce the amount of what we call power to liquid, the synthetic fuels, if you said how much we use today, we're going to project that we need by 2045, and the amount of energy that would be required to create that fuel is already twice as much electricity is used today on a global market. And that's just for aviation. And so the amount of energy in the entire market is just going to have to increase as we move away, if we're going to move away from fossil fuels.
I totally agree that we need to dramatically increase renewable energy generation. And I think, and storage. And I think, again, to this audience, to the extent that it's appropriate, I still think that there is more runway to go in reducing the cost of deploying renewable energy technologies. And absolutely, whether it's zero carbon or low carbon fuels, synthetic fuels, or decarbonizing industrial heat processing, by either thermal storage direct from electricity, or if you want to go through hydrogen, there's a conversion step to go through hydrogen, so you can avoid that by just going to electric to thermal storage. But there's an immense amount of renewable energy generation required, and it's there, right? Like the sun is up in the sky. It's a huge reactor, just producing insane amount of power for us to absorb in either solar or wind or other forms. So yeah, going after it is a major thing that has to happen.
Yeah. I want to touch upon 2 more questions, and then I'll ask the audience questions. So let me come back to the batteries again. What about fast charging? What's the view of fast charging, more for Drew and Tom, and battery swapping as well? I think these keep coming up over the years. Fast charging versus swapping, do we need it? That's one. And also the safety. Given the safety, the lithium ion is still not safe enough. So these 2 questions, I don't know who wants to take the question.
Well, maybe it'll be presumptuous of me to go first, given where Tesla is on fast charging. But Drew, if you'll humor me, just and then I'll turn over to you. Yeah. So clearly, from Toyota's view, fast charging is an important element, right? It gives consumer confidence. You're out. You need to top off. You can find a place to do it. So it's an important part of enabling the mindset for consumers to want to feel comfortable purchasing the vehicles. And it seems, and again, Drew has more experience in this space, clearly, but it seems that in some respects, the fast chargers are a great and necessary option, and particularly if you have a place to charge at home. But there's a lot of, only 40-some% of households in the US have a garage, and then there's an awful lot of folks who live in urban, dense areas and in multi-unit dwellings. And the access to fast charging for those folks, if they can't charge at home at night because they live in a place that doesn't have the ability to do that, or at scale anyways, there just simply isn't enough parking spaces and chargers for that entire 30-story high-rise of people who, at 100%, are all going to have EVs, right? And so it boggles my mind a little bit to think about kind of all of the data needs and everything else that's going to go into making it all work. I know you guys are getting experience at that, and I think others are as well. But it does strike me, particularly for the people in the high-density areas, they're all going to be competing for that, a couple of hours in the morning and a couple of hours at night during their commutes to get at these fast chargers. And there's going to be a lot of them. So, yeah,
on the fast charger versus swapping, I think if we look at the larger problem, which is that the grid needs to be 100% renewable, and therefore we need to have a lot of storage for the grid, ultimately we want all of these parked cars to be plugged in. And once that is the case, whether you have ability to charge at home or not, when you're not at home, you should be able to plug in, because the middle of the day is when the sun is out. That's when you want the cars charging, so that the cars can help the grid at other times. Because otherwise the solar is going to have to be curtailed. It doesn't really make sense to curtail it if you can charge a car with it instead. So if you sort of like zoom out to the larger picture of how to balance the grid, we want cars to always be plugged in, or wirelessly charging. It doesn't matter whether it's a plug or it's wireless. It doesn't really matter. It's interacting with the grid.
So Drew, would that make sense from the infrastructure building standpoint for each car to plug in if they are not in driving? So I would love to hear the idea. How do we do that?
It's not while they're driving. It's just like when they're parked. Like personal cars spend like 95% of their time parked, or maybe 90% of their time parked. It's that time that they should be interacting with the grid to sort of overall reduce the cost of going 100% renewable by like piggybacking on the use case of this personal car that isn't always used. And that sort of covers the home case where I'm not on a road trip. And then when you are on a road trip, getting the battery energy density, battery size and the platform efficiency and the fast charge speed to the point where you're only stopping on a road trip as often as like humans want to stop, like to eat or go to the bathroom or whatever. When you're at that, philosophically, you don't need anything else. And that's been Tesla's target. We achieve it, with the vehicles we make, and we don't get a lot of customer feedback to the contrary that they want to be able to swap their batteries. They're happy with the density of the fast chargers and the sort of frequency of stopping to charge. And to the like, will we be able to get enough charging infrastructure into the ground? There's actually a lot of really good leading indicators in Europe. There are some European countries where honestly, there's enough chargers for the number of vehicles, and the vehicle, almost 100% of the vehicles being sold there are electric. So there are indications in these markets that are highly penetrated that this is a solvable problem. And as all the markets develop to the same level of penetration, it will seem like it's solved to all of us. I mean, we're deploying thousands of chargers a quarter nowadays.
Yeah. So let's take some questions from the audience. The first one, Amanda, to you. Mm-hmm. For aviation, looks like got to be the fuels to do it. What type of fuel, whether it's hydrogen and others. One question from the audience is, what do you see as the largest challenges, maybe one, maybe two, maybe more, for the adoption of renewable fuels for aviation?
Yeah, I mean, this is an easy answer because the industry has been looking at this now for quite some time, and it's production. The converting either existing plants or building new production facilities to either create biofuels or these synthetic fuels that are drop-in to today's fleet and tomorrow's fleet. We're at 1/10 of 1% of production of demand. So again, you're talking 1,000-time expansion that is necessary in the next, by 2050.
Sounds like a good opportunity for somebody.
Yeah, I mean, and it is. And as part of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a blender's tax credit to incentivize the development of these production capabilities by reducing the cost, thus increasing demand. But right now what we're seeing is the airlines, the operators are all insisting on using higher quantity blends of the bio or the drop-in fuels. All our aircraft today are approved to run on up to a 50% blend, but when you only have 1/10 of 1% available, there's a long way to go. All of our aircraft by 2030, us and the other manufacturers will all be 100% drop-in compatible. There's a few items that we have to resolve, but once you have the fleet compatible, you have to get the production to get there. And part of that comes from the blender's tax credit. There's going to be a process that we call book and claim. So it doesn't, if you buy the fuel at one place, you can use it elsewhere and then claim it where you need it, so that we don't end up transporting fuel just to meet certain objectives, but we're actually consuming and doing the best job of reducing our impact on sustainability.
Yeah, thank you. So next question is for, I think, for Drew and Tom. Now this ban by certain time, not selling combustion car anymore. The question was, would that be a good policy versus saying promoting the more electrical car, make it more economically viable? Since looks like the battery scaling, this person's question is the battery scaling will take a long time and to build up. So what will be the better policy? Yeah. I think it's a tough one.
I think governments need to be responsible to the people that they govern, and like if the people that they govern are promoting an EV ban, then they should do it, I think.
Or an ICE ban.
Yeah, or an ICE. Sorry, an ICE ban. That's what I meant to say. Yeah. An ICE ban. Yeah.
But that's also a true statement, I guess, right? If that's what the people want.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, regulations sometimes get out ahead of technology, for sure. I don't think that we're seeing a lot of that happening right now with EVs. It would be a shame if the opposite happened, where the regulatory interaction with this space decelerated it, and there's always risk of that by picking and choosing certain technologies or overly incentivizing one thing versus another, or adding a lot of rules and regulations for stuff like charging infrastructure. Anything like that could potentially decelerate it. I think there's enough sort of disparity in how the governments are interacting in this space that I don't see us at risk of being regulated into not enough vehicles to go around. Now, that could change, but it's not a risk that I've seen at the moment.
Yeah.
So, my view is, I don't know if it's different, but a lot of it depends on the time frames too, right? So banning ICEs so that electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles, can compete is kind of an oxymoron, right? It's not competition in that case. It's a government policy, which we understand. But again, if you ban ICEs, you're essentially banning plug-in hybrids. You're banning hybrids. You're banning vehicles that are not available in battery electric vehicles today. We have dozens of segments of our industry. We have 290 million cars in the country, 320 million people. There is a huge, as I said in the opening comment, a huge diversity of economic circumstances. If you ban ICEs in the next 10 years, you are going to put a whole lot of people in a world of hurt in terms of affordability and their access to transportation. So, can we even supply the minerals and so forth to accomplish that? And so again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we go back to the need for multiple options. There's a lot of uncertainty around some of these issues moving forward in terms of the ability to get to these huge numbers and scale. And so the solution to uncertainty is diversity. And so that's what we think makes sense.
Well, in the step out of my aerospace or aviation box for just a second, when you say ICE, we all assume gasoline powered, but you can have an internal combustion engine that runs on hydrogen. So you have to be careful about what the regulation's actual benefit's going to be versus its intent, right?
Yeah. So I want to take more questions from the audience. So there's one question about bidirectional charging. I mean, if you communicate with electrical grid, you charge your car, you can also return electricity. Would that cause a concern about the volunteer, the battery life, the vehicle life right there?
Well, first, getting vehicles to charge when there's excess renewable supply on the grid is different than bidirectional charging. It's just balancing supply and demand on the grid and charging when the grid has excess renewable power. Bidirectional charging can the vehicles also help go the other way? One of the interesting things about the California use case, I don't know how many of you live in California that are here today, but the period when the grid is most stressed is when most cars are in motion, which is maybe true in many places, but it's definitely true here. If you look at that, like 4 to 9 p.m., like those personal vehicles, that's when you're picking the kids up or commuting home or doing whatever you're doing. You're not actually able to support the grid at that point in time. That is the most stressful period of the duck curve. So I don't actually know, when we look at the overall balancing requirements of all the various grids, how much energy will actually need to go or should go the other way. But as long as we compensate people appropriately in the market for participating with their battery, I don't see it as a risk. I don't also expect customers to just sort of like freely offer it either. So if the compensation is there for, hey, you're putting a little wear and tear on my battery, pay me a little bit for the service, I don't see a problem.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think you've got to compensate people for doing that, and yeah, there may be some degradation of the battery from frequent charge, discharge, back into the grid. And like everything, it'll end up being a balance. And if that balance works out for the auto company in terms of brand reputation and other things, you also, just because somebody's willing to pay doesn't keep the internet quiet in terms of the experiences that people have. So you don't want that to be a situation that happens. And so if you can design the battery to be more durable, to be able to take that kind of cycling, that's even better. But yeah, basically agree with what Drew said.
Yeah. So I want to touch one last question, and then I want you to also imagine, I'll ask now, right? The last question will be 2050, how the sustainable transportation will look like. But that's last. But let me ask my second last. My second last is the whole world is changing really a lot geopolitically. about the global supply chain now tends to be localized. That's bringing new challenges right there. We're looking at the recent the bipartisan infrastructure law supporting the domestic supply chain, building it up, decoupling between countries, right? There's a war going on somewhere. So, and tomorrow we're going to hear about energy security panel as well. So, and this whole landscape changing, including probably renewable fuel landscape is changing, also get affected by this. So what's your thought about the global supply chain, this evolving landscape for sustainable transportation? Would that kind of slow down the progress? What's needed? It sounds to me once things get localized, you need a lot more investment. Different countries just do their own investment to build this up. What's your thought?
I tend to think it's a great opportunity to, whether it's on the aviation side or the terrestrial side, the opportunity to produce the fuels where you need them, in conjunction with leveraging existing infrastructure distribution systems, is necessary to get to the quantities and the amounts of production that we need, whether it's in liquid fuels or electricity. So I don't see this as being a negative, but an opportunity for the industries to respond and fill.
We're an inherently global business, and there's a lot of benefits of global supply chains, right? I mean, we've all had to deal with a lot of issues here over the past several years, with chips and you name it, pretty much everything else that we could possibly have in our supply chain getting disrupted, and so there's advantages to having that diversity of supply. At the same time, our philosophy has always been, as much as it makes sense, to try to build where we sell, right? So we've built, we're building a battery plant in North Carolina, so that we can more localize some of that type of production. But like everything in life, it comes down to a balance between what we can feasibly do here, particularly if we're talking about battery, for example, and the mining and the permitting and everything else, versus what it might make sense to get from, other parts of the world, and ideally parts of the world that we are friendly with and peaceful and collaborative with. And so, I think it's a great question, but it like everything else kind of comes down to a balance, I think.
Yeah, the embedded energy and kind of cost benefits of being localized from a production and supply perspective are I think pretty obvious. And the biggest risk, I think, with the regulatory changes and the geopolitical changes is with any regulatory uncertainty, investment decisions are harder to make. And to the extent that there's ongoing shifts in the winds of regulatory frameworks and trade frameworks and what needs to be done where and what qualifies for what credit, that kind of thing can retard the pace of accelerating investments in various industries and localization or not localization factories of different types. So, but I think that's not new news for anybody. Like regulatory uncertainty slows investment activities down, is what it does. And to the extent that we can not have that, we will accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. You don't have to look very far. You just look at like the PTC for wind in the United States, the ITC for solar. Regulatory uncertainty around that has done all kinds of odd distortions in industrial activity in the renewable energy space in North America.
Yeah. So 15 seconds each. Sustainable transportation at 2050. 15 seconds.
Who's first?
Whoever is ready.
We're all looking down that end.
I'm super excited about what it's going to be like in 2050. The pace of change from when I started at Tesla in 2006 to today is like well beyond my wildest imagination. And I think if we all just continue to collaborate to make this very feasible future a reality, it will be a reality. So,
Tom?
Way more renewables, way more electrification, hydrogen corridors where it makes sense, and passenger hydrogen vehicles being sold within those corridors, along with other electrified vehicles. Who knows, maybe many of us not purchasing vehicles anymore.
Amanda.
80% of the fleet today are older generation aircraft, and they're coming up in the next 30 years for retirement. So going with these aircraft with the newer engines, which is all about efficiency, which is the first step that you can do to reduce the amount of emissions. So that's going to be a big shift over the next 30 years, followed by the introduction of these zero-emission aircraft. They will start showing up in the next 15 to 20 years, and hopefully be plentiful by 2050.
You know what? At 2050, I'm not retiring yet. I will be still working. With that, thank you very much.
Thanks.